Hello and good morning. I literally have no plan. This is just a completely unstructured stream of consciousness ramble about the state of AI. So, OpenAI just released their agent builder, and they had a few other things at Dev Day. Some people were disappointed that they didn't say anything about GPT-6. I didn't watch the full thing. Maybe they mentioned it, but there was some disappointment out there. And one thing that I wanted to address, I made a post about this on my YouTube page, and I've talked about it on Twitter as well a little bit. But one of the most alarming trends is that many people are jumping on any bad news about AI. And I don't mean like in the Gary Marcus kind of like, I'm skeptical and I'm going to, misrepresent things. One example is people are seizing upon that MIT study that showed or that claimed that 95% of AI pilots fail. Now, here's the thing is that many pilots fail. That's why they're pilots. And so whether or not it's AI or any other technology, in my 15-year career in IT infrastructure and automation, you try stuff all the time. And a lot of it doesn't work. A lot of it doesn't add business value. Some of it doesn't move the needle enough. Even if it's a really good enterprise grade product, a lot of stuff it doesn't fit your environment. You have vendors selling you stuff all the time and you try it. And so people seize upon that number and they're like, AI isn't doing anything. AI is stupid. But the thing is a 5% success rate for pilots is really good, especially when the ones that succeed can do things like code for 30 hours autonomously like Claude can. And when you take a step back and you look at the fact that like every CEO from like Walmart to Boeing and everyone else, like across all industries, literally all of them are saying that they are reassessing hiring in light of generative AI. And the patterns are pretty clear where one of the places that enterprises are looking at it is HR and middle management, because one of the primary jobs of middle management and HR is to process a huge amount of paperwork and meetings and emails and that sort of thing. Well, generative AI can, with a 2 million token window, it can read your entire organization's email in a few minutes and figure out who needs what. And then of course HR is about matching, report to policy or matching, policy to action or whatever else. Mostly, this is an exaggeration, but in some business tasks, HR's job is just matching policies. Now, obviously, HR, there is a very powerful human element. For instance, if you need to provide coaching or feedback or training, but the point is that you don't need back office workers who are going to be sitting there doing paperwork all the time. You can only have the HR folks that are focusing on the real stuff to do. And so, also another thing, when technologies are new, people don't know how to use it. When I first got my job in information technology, everyone was just called an IT analyst because it was blowing up so fast. No one knew what to do, or no one knew what the job titles should even be called. When big data first became a thing, the job titles were data wrangler. Have you heard data wrangler in 15 or 20 years? No. They just call it big data analyst or whatever. They have more specific terms. I don't think anyone uses the term data wrangler anymore. And I remember watching an interview with a guy who's like, I guess my job is data wrangler because I use Python to try and make sense of all this data and all these new tools like technology changes really fast. And I think a big part of where people are getting confused is because a lot of the terminology and things that are being thrown around for people that are technologists, people that have worked in enterprises, in IT departments, who have deployed technology, a lot of this is just run-of-the-mill news. And this is one of the reasons that I forget to comment on a lot of stuff, because from my career perspective, I'm like, this is just expected. This is just how things go in the technology space. But for the first time in a while, probably since the late 90s and early 2000s when Microsoft was blowing up, and Steve Ballmer was like, developers, and the takeoff of the internet, for the first time in a long time, people are really paying attention to technology, and in this case, in the business side of technology. Now, obviously, plenty of other channels out there focus on, the new tools that are coming out in the scientific papers. But I think that me focusing on the business side, because again, I worked at really big companies. I'm not going to list them, but I've worked at a Silicon Valley giant. I've worked at other enterprises, and so that's my home base. Is just okay. What is it? What is actually happening here? So for that MIT study where they say 95% of pilots fail, basically the life cycle of a failed pilot is some middle manager or director or even just senior manager comes to someone who's a principal engineer like I was and says, "Hey Dave, one of our vendors is trying to sell us this new Copilot or automation tool, my boss told me try out a few things just to see if it sticks to make our account executive happy. Go try it and see what happens." This happens all the time. So then you pull out a project requisition and a change order to install this application or install this server, and you get all the firewall exceptions so that you can plug it in, and then you turn it on. With the vendors, they usually give you a 30 or 90-day license key, and so then you say, okay, cool, it's collecting data and it's giving me some output, and more often than not, it's something that you've already got covered with 3 other applications or something that isn't even relevant to your infrastructure. Now, all infrastructure has some things in common. And when I say infrastructure, think data centers. Data centers, which is everything from the hardware up. So that's what I was responsible for, was not physically rack and stack. That was like, the data center floor team. But everything, once it had power, from there up through the virtualization stack and the automation and the middleware connections, and everything that allowed the business to run, that's what I was responsible for. So I was like, that was my meat and potatoes. And so, yeah, like you say, it failed because it didn't immediately provide obvious benefit. Now, here's the other thing: is from an enterprise perspective, it just because something failed doesn't mean that it was too expensive. In some cases, it didn't add value. Sometimes it was too expensive. Very rarely do these things actually go directly to the bottom line or the top line. And what I mean by that is that, for instance, my perspective as an infrastructure and automation engineer is operational excellence. What I was focusing on was uptime. My work was so detached from the actual business line. When I was at the Silicon Valley tech giant working in the lab, I supported the engineers who supported the customers, and so we were technically a cost center. But the people who were earning revenue for the company, they couldn't do their job without people like me. When I was working in a retail enterprise, again, IT infrastructure is considered a cost center, but if that infrastructure goes down, all the stores shut down. So for me, my primary metric of success is, does this help me improve my uptime? Because that is the absolute number one primary thing that was my responsibility as a principal engineer of IT infrastructure and cloud infrastructure and automation. Is I wanted to hit 6 nines uptime. So that's 99.9999% availability, meaning less than 32 seconds of downtime per year. And I hit that on my last year as a principal engineer. Nobody celebrated it because that's just what they expect. You expect it to be like lights. You expect it to be like the power switch. You just turn the switch and it comes on. That was my goal. Now, does that have a direct measurable impact to sales? Yes, it does. But from a business perspective, they have to say like, oh, well, we had fewer Sev1 cases or fewer CAPS cases or fewer P1 cases. So a Sev1 is like all hands on deck. Generally, that means like the business is losing money and business has halted and it requires immediate intervention. That's the kind of stuff I was responsible for, and I was asked for by name all the way up in the company because that's how good I was. Not to toot my own horn, but there's a reason that like I was able to switch careers. So like that's just providing some perspective. So for me as an IT infrastructure engineer and cloud engineer, if someone says, hey, we have this generative AI tool and it's going to make all these changes to your infrastructure, the first thing I'm going to say is it trackable? Is it reversible? How is it making these decisions? Because guess what? Even before generative AI, people wanted to put all kinds of AI-based tools in our infrastructure to automatically, tweak these little knobs and levers and measure flows and that sort of thing. But at least when I left, and that was, approaching 3 or 4 years ago, The AI back then was not good enough to really fully make automated decisions unless you rebuilt your infrastructure from scratch according to completely modern standards and best practices. And by the way, no infrastructure out there, unless it is brand new, is built to be completely consistent, because you've got older versions, you've got older configurations, you've got different paradigms, different schools of thought, particularly once your data centers are 20, 30, or more years old. Because why? Technical debt. So a lot of these things can't handle technical debt. So all of that is to say that when you have a pilot, a generative AI pilot that has failed, sometimes it doesn't fit in the organization. Sometimes it is it's too expensive. Sometimes it just doesn't add any value for you. Now, with that being said, 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 20 things that you try, it's like, yes, I need that right now. So an example of that, one of the last things that I deployed in my infrastructure was VMware Skyline. So this was something that aggregated all of your dashboards into one place so that you could clearly see where all the threats were in your infrastructure. And it gave you a nice prioritized list of, here's the biggest risks, here's the biggest threats, here's the newest ones, go fix them. And so that's what I did as a principal engineer. Was I needed a tool that specifically said, here's the issue. Reading logs. If I were still in the industry today, that's where I would use generative AI right now. Is I want it to be reading all of my logs and then telling me, going to look up, this is the KB article to fix that problem. Here's what that log means. Explain it to me in natural language, and just have a copilot built into my log readers. Now that is very, very arcane. Like, I never explained what my job was to anyone, because the moment that you say like IT cloud infrastructure and automation, people just glaze over, right? It's like, okay, just go back to the mines, Dave. So all of that is to provide some context to say that when MIT says that 95% of AI pilots fail, like, that doesn't mean anything from an enterprise perspective. That is just Tuesday, where it's like, okay, yeah, we promised our vendor because we have, and here's another thing that happens is your sales executive is just a sales bro. And, they're like, oh, hey, by the way, I was looking at your account and you've got 20 unused licenses. Do you want to convert those to something else? Because your sales executive, all he wants to do is make sales. He wants to maintain the relationship and make sales. And so then it's like, here's this free new thing, go try it out. And for them, whether or not it even converts to a sale doesn't matter that much, because then they just get the feedback, because those client executives, they're also talking to the product team. And so when you're a giant enterprise client, like, you're basically a free beta tester to them. And that's why sometimes they just hand you license keys, because they're like, go try this and provide feedback. Yes, it's version 1, but we need the feedback from an enterprise client so you can tell us, why is this not valuable to you, or what would change it so that it becomes valuable to you. And so, when I wrote on, I wrote a note saying, like, guys, like, this is when people say AI isn't going that great, it's a major failure, like, do not ignore them. And someone's like, Dave, what's your sources? My sources is 15 years in the industry. So, all right, this turned into a rant. Like I said, I had literally no plan starting this up. I was just like, what's on my mind? All right, so there you have it. From an enterprise perspective, yes, 95% of everything is a failure when it's brand new. That doesn't matter, because the 5% that stick, they really, really dramatically move the needle. And when you take a step back and you see, Walmart's firing 4,000 HR people, and so is firing 12,000 HR people, and so is refactoring their legal department, and so is refactoring, their call centers. That's the 5% that succeeds, and that's just the 5% that succeeds based on the capabilities from a year or two ago. Because guess what? It takes that long to bring an enterprise product to market. The fastest you can possibly bring an enterprise product to market that is fully polished and it's going to be adopted by Boeings and Walmarts and whoever else, Ace Hardware, the big box stores. The absolute fastest you can bring something to market is about 18 months, and that is if you are hands on deck, all hands on deck, red alert to bring something to market. Generally speaking, it takes like 3 years to bring something to market. So when they say that, 5%, only 5% succeed, that's on 2-year-old technology minimum. So, all right, I'm getting lost in the rants. So that's my take as an infrastructure expert. So whenever people say, like, AI is failing, just ignore it. It's noise. It's fluff. It's noise. They don't know what they're talking about. All right. Bye.